My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 32 years old, and I have spent the last 8 years teaching newborn lungs how to open when they are not ready for the world yet. I have stood beside incubators at 3.0 inches the morning, counting breaths too small for most people to notice, with my hands steady and my voice soft enough not to frighten a mother already hanging by a thread. But on the Friday Rowe stopped me outside the maternity wing. It wasn't a baby who needed air, it was me. I had just finished a 13-hour shift at St. Anselm Children's Hospital in Dayton. My scrub top was wrinkled, my badge was turned backward. There was a pale crescent of tape stuck to my wrist from where I had pulled it off a ventilator tube too quickly. All I wanted was coffee, my car, and 10 minutes where nobody needed me to be calm. Then I saw her by the elevators. Rowe wore a cream coat and church pearls. The same kind of outfit she used to wear when she smiled at women over casserole dishes and told them she was praying for me. Behind her, down the hall, was the room where Lila Hart, my former best friend, was recovering with the baby boy. Everyone in town believed belonged to Ethan, my ex-husband. Marlene looked me over slowly, taking in my tired eyes and hospital shoes, and smiled like she had been waiting all afternoon. "Leaving you was my son's best decision," she said, loud enough for the nurses at the desk to hear. "Now he finally has the son you could never give him." I did not move. I touched the silver clip on my scrub pocket, the one my grandmother left me, and asked, "Is that what he told you?" 5 minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and my lawyer walked out holding the name Marlene had never wanted spoken aloud. Before I tell you whose name was in that folder, you need to understand why Marlene's words landed where they did. They were not new. They were only the loudest version of a sentence my life had been hearing for years. I grew up in Springfield, Ohio, in a 2-bedroom house, with a porch that leaned left and a kitchen table my father fixed 3 times before admitting the legs were never going to sit even. My mother worked nights at a laundromat off East Main, folding other people's sheets until her knuckles cracked. My father repaired farm equipment until arthritis took the strength out of his hands and pride took care of the rest. In our house, you did not make trouble just because something hurt. You finished the shift. You paid the bill. You kept your voice level. That was the language I carried into adulthood. I became a respiratory therapist because of my cousin's baby, born too early on a rainy April morning when I was 17. I remember standing outside the glass of the NICU, watching a nurse adjust a tube smaller than a shoelace while everyone else prayed. What stayed with me was not the crying. It was the waiting before the crying. That terrible little silence when a whole room holds its breath for someone too small to fight alone. Years later, that became my work. At St. Anselm, I knew the sound of every alarm before I saw the monitor. I knew which mothers needed facts and which fathers needed a chair before their knees gave out. I could adjust a ventilator for a baby, no bigger than a loaf of bread, while a doctor stood at my shoulder and a grandmother sobbed behind the curtain. I could stay calm when calm was the only useful thing left in the room. People respected that about me. At least at work they did. The hospital smelled like warmed plastic, cotton blankets, and antiseptic. It was the first place in my life where nobody cared who my parents were, or whether I came from money, or whether my shoes were new. A baby either needed air, or didn't. A monitor either steadied, or it didn't. Truth was clean there. Numbers, oxygen levels, chest movement, response. I liked that. What I did not understand then was that being calm in an emergency and being silent under cruelty are not the same virtue. One saves lives. The other can slowly erase yours. I had spent years listening for the smallest signs of life. But when people began stealing the air from my name, I kept telling myself the truth would breathe on its own. Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet your phone battery is at 75% right now, right? If that's true, type 6. If not, type 8. Let's see whether I got it right. Alright, enough talking. Let's begin the story. I met Ethan Rowe at a charity fish fry behind Grace Hollow Methodist, the kind of summer evening where the air smelled like hot oil, cut grass, and rain that hadn't decided whether to fall. He was 32 then, 6 years older than me, wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, helping an old woman carry 2 paper plates to her car. That was how Ethan moved through the world. Useful in public, gentle where people could see him. He remembered names, asked after sick relatives, and had the kind of smile that made widows call him a good boy even after he was grown. By the next June, I was standing beside him in that same church fellowship hall, while Marlene arranged the flowers herself and told everyone I was lucky. I believed her. For a while, I thought I had married into something solid. Sunday dinners, Christmas candles, a husband who kissed my forehead before work and called me brave when I came home too tired to speak. Then came the waiting. At first, trying for a baby felt almost sweet. We bought vitamins. I downloaded an app. Ethan joked about needing a bigger house before we needed a nursery. Month after month, the jokes got thinner. The app became something I checked in the bathroom with the door locked. The extra bedroom stayed painted pale yellow because we had chosen the color early, before Hope started feeling embarrassing. After the first year, I said what I would have told any patient's family to say. We should both get checked. Ethan laughed like I had suggested something indecent. Clara, Rowe men don't need tests for something God decides. He said it kindly the first time. The second time, less kindly. By the third, his jaw tightened before I even finished the sentence. So I did what quiet women do when they are trying not to make a man feel small. I made myself smaller. I went alone. Dr. Nolan Price reviewed my blood work, my scans, every careful number, and told me there was no clear reason I couldn't conceive. I remember sitting in my car afterward with the paper folded in my lap, watching rain slide down the windshield in crooked lines. Relief should have come. It didn't. Because if the answer was not on my page, then it was somewhere Ethan refused to let anyone look. I brought the paper home and never showed him. That was my mistake. A month later, Marlene started saying things softly. At a church fundraiser, she introduced me to Bethany Pike with one hand resting on my shoulder like a blessing. "This is Clara," she said. "She works with babies. Such a tender calling. Such a shame she and Ethan never had their own." Then she smiled. "Some women can comfort a child. That doesn't mean they were meant to have one." I stood there holding a tray of foil-covered casserole while my thumb pressed a dent into the lid. Nobody gasped. Nobody corrected her. Bethany only tilted her head with that church basement pity I would come to know too well. That night, I learned how a lie begins. Not as a scream, as sympathy. And once people pity you, they stop asking whether the story is true. Lila Hart was the first person I called after that fundraiser. Not because I wanted advice. Advice was too clean a word for what I needed. I wanted someone to sit in the ugly part with me, and not try to decorate it. She had been doing that since we were 15, since sophomore chemistry, when Mrs. Kepler accused me of giving her answers just because Lila had borrowed my notebook the week before. Lila was pretty in a soft, careless way, the kind of woman who could twist her hair up with a pencil and make it look intentional. By the time we were adults, she owned Hart and Bloom, a little flower shop near the courthouse with striped awnings and buckets of peonies on the sidewalk every May. She made bridal bouquets for women who cried over ribbon colors, funeral sprays for families too numb to choose lilies, centerpieces for half the church events in town. She knew how to make sorrow look presentable. That night, she came over with a bottle of grocery store white wine and a cardboard box of leftover wedding flowers she said would only go to waste. She put pale roses in a jar on my kitchen table and listened while I told her what Marlene had said. Lila's face folded into sympathy exactly where I needed it to. "Oh, Clara," she said, reaching for my hand. "You cannot let that woman decide what makes you whole." It was the right sentence. That was the trouble with Lila. She often said the right sentence, but looking back, every comfort had a hook buried somewhere inside it. "You have such a gift with those babies," she told me. "Maybe that is your motherhood, in a way." I nodded because I was tired, and because it sounded kind. I did not hear what sat underneath it. Not then, not while I was grateful to have one person who seemed to understand. After that, Lila came by more often. sometimes with flowers, sometimes with soup, sometimes just to sit on my couch and ask whether Ethan was home. At first, I thought she was checking on me. Then I noticed she always knew which nights I worked late before I remembered telling her. She knew when Ethan's office closed early. She knew he hated cilantro now, though that was something he had only started saying after we married. Small things, harmless things, if you are not looking at them through the right light. Once, I came home from a double shift and found a vase of white ranunculus on the counter. Ethan said Lila had dropped them off because she had extras from a wedding. He said it casually, without looking up from his phone. I remember touching one of the petals. It was soft as skin and already bruising at the edge. People like Lila do not steal your life all at once. They borrow your kitchen, your husband's schedule, your private grief. They sit beside you while you fall apart and call it loyalty. And because I was lonely, I handed her the towel. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, folded inside a manila envelope on the kitchen counter, beside Ethan's house key and the blue mug he always used, but apparently did not want badly enough to take. I had just come home from a night shift. My hair smelled like hospital soap. My feet hurt so badly I had to stand still in the doorway before I could make myself walk farther. For a moment, I thought the envelope was an insurance file he had forgotten. Then I saw my name. He had already taken half his clothes, his good watch, the framed photo from our trip to Lake Erie, and the little wooden box where we kept spare change for vacations we never took. He left the nursery paint swatches in the junk drawer. Pale yellow, soft sage, cloud white. All those tiny squares of hope, still clipped together like they belonged to people who were coming back. Ethan did not wait to tell me in person. That was the part that made me sit down. Not the divorce itself. Not even the empty side of the closet. It was the neatness of it. The way he had removed himself from our life as if he were canceling a policy. 3 days later, I found out where he had gone, because someone from church texted me by mistake. Praying for Ethan and Lila, God makes families in his timing. I read it at the kitchen table with my coat still on. The dishwasher was running, making that low, steady rush of water that suddenly felt too loud for the house. I remember staring at Lila's name until the letters stopped looking like letters. My best friend, my husband. My silence, sitting between them like a gift I had wrapped myself. By early fall, Lila was pregnant. The whole town treated it like a verdict. Blue balloons appeared at Hart and Bloom. Marlene hosted a shower in the church hall with a cake that said a Rowe boy in looping white icing. I saw the photos at 1:17 inches the morning, sitting in the NICU break room under a vending machine light. Ethan's hand rested on Lila's shoulder. Marlene stood beside them, glowing like the world had finally proven her right. A monitor alarm sounded down the hall. I locked my phone, stood up, and went back to the only place that still measured truth in breaths, not rumors. The thing about rumors is that they do not stop at church doors. They follow people into grocery aisles, waiting rooms, school board meetings, and eventually into places that pretend to be too professional for gossip. At Street Anselm, nobody said Marlene's words to my face. They were kinder than that. Adults often are when they are taking something from you. I had been in line for the NICU respiratory supervisor position for nearly a year. Harriet Cole, our nurse manager, had told me twice to update my resume because the department needed someone who knew the night shift from the inside, not just from reports. I had trained 6 new therapists, helped rewrite the emergency airway checklist after a near miss, and built a handoff system that helped cut documented shift change errors nearly in half. I did not campaign for the job. I simply did the work until the work pointed back at me. For a while, everyone seemed to understand that. Then Lila's pregnancy became public, and the tone around my name changed in ways too small to report and too sharp to ignore. Conversations paused when I entered the break room. A volunteer from Grace Hollow squeezed my arm near the vending machines and told me God had other plans for some women. One of the younger therapists asked if I was taking time off to heal, though I had not requested a single day. I kept showing up. That was what I knew how to do. The interview panel met on a Monday morning in October. I wore a navy blazer over a clean blouse and sat across from 3 administrators, including Graham Ellis, a hospital board member with silver hair, polished shoes, and a golf friendship with Ethan's uncle. Graham had never. They were once watched me work a night in the NICU. Still, he leaned back in his chair and asked whether the past several months had affected my emotional steadiness. I looked at him for a second too long. Then I answered like a professional. 2 weeks later, Human Resources called me into a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and printer ink. They told me I had been a strong candidate. They told me it had been a difficult decision. They told me the position had gone to someone with less seniority and none of the protocols I had helped build. They did not say Marlene's name. They did not say Ethan's. They did not say Lila's baby. They did not have to. The raise I lost came to $31,800 a year, not counting bonuses. But the number was not what hollowed me out. It was the note I later learned had been written beside my name. Leadership concerns following personal instability. That was when I finally understood. My silence had not protected my dignity. It had given other people permission to define it. Harriet Cole found me in the supply room 20 minutes after HR sent me back to the unit. I was standing between stacked boxes of sterile tubing and infant cannulas, pretending to count inventory because counting was easier than feeling. She did not ask if I was all right. Harriet had been a nurse too long to insult people with questions she already knew the answer to. She closed the door behind her and handed me a paper cup of coffee gone lukewarm. "Drink," she said. I did. Harriet was 61, with silver hair pinned low, and a voice that could quiet a panicked father faster than any security guard. She had watched me come in as a new therapist with stiff shoes and too much eagerness. She had watched me learn which alarms meant fear and which ones meant hurry. She had also watched me become quieter after Ethan left. For a while, she said nothing. Then she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a business card. Ada Keene. Civil litigation. I looked at it, then at her. "I'm not suing my ex-husband because people gossip," I said. "No," Harriet said. "You're going to talk to someone because gossip just cost you a job." That was the difference, and I hated that she was right. Ada's office sat behind a clock repair shop on 3rd Street, up a narrow staircase that smelled like dust, machine oil, and old wood. The waiting room had 2 chairs, one fern trying not to die, and a wall full of clocks that did not tick together. I almost turned around before the receptionist said my name. Ada Keene was 59, maybe 60, with gray hair cut to her chin and reading glasses hanging from a chain. She did not soften her face when I told her the story. She did not gasp when I said Lila's name. She only wrote dates, places, witnesses, and the exact words people had used. When I finished, she set her pen down. "This is not about revenge," she said. "Revenge wants noise. What you need is a record." I stared at the card in my hand until the edges bent. Ada explained it plainly. If Marlene had made specific false statements, if those statements had spread, and if they had caused measurable harm, then maybe there was a case. Not an easy one. Not a clean one. But a real one. The hard part would be forcing them to choose. Either they would call those words opinion and try to hide behind cruelty dressed as concern, or they would say the words were true. "And if they say it's true?" I asked. Ada leaned back. "Then they have to prove it." I went home with my medical records in a folder and my grandmother's silver clip in my palm. For 19 days, I told myself not to do it. Then I remembered Graham's note beside my name. The next morning, before my shift, I called Ada. "I'm in," I said. "Good," she answered. "Then we make them say it under oath." Ada filed the complaint on a Thursday afternoon, and by Friday morning, half the town seemed to know before I had finished my first cup of coffee. That was how Dayton behaved when it wanted to pretend it was not a small town. The streets were wider, the hospitals bigger, the churches spread farther apart, But news still traveled the old way. Through women with covered dishes, through men at the barber shop, through prayer chains that somehow always needed names. The complaint was simple on paper, which made it feel stranger to read. My life, reduced to numbered paragraphs. Marlene's words in the fellowship hall. Bethany Pike's name listed as a witness. The volunteer, near the vending machines. The hospital note about personal instability. The supervisor position I lost. The salary difference. $31,800 a year, printed so neatly, it looked almost polite. Ada warned me that filing would make things louder before it made anything clearer. She was right. Marlene told her church circle I had become bitter. Ethan told people I was trying to punish him for finding happiness. Lila posted a photograph of the baby's hand curled around Ethan's finger with the caption, "God restores what was taken." I saw it because someone sent it to me with a question mark, as if I might want to explain my own humiliation in the comments. I did not reply. At work, Harriet looked at my face and moved me to the far side of the unit for the day, away from visitors, away from volunteers, away from anyone who thought curiosity was the same thing as concern. I adjusted oxygen flow. I checked charts. I answered mothers in the calm voice I had built over years. But under that calm, something new had started. Not anger exactly. More like a door inside me had closed and locked from the inside. 2 weeks later, Ada called me back to her office. The clocks behind the wall were all ticking at different speeds again. I remember that because she did not speak right away. She slid a folder across the desk and tapped one paragraph with the end of her pen. "They answered," she said. I read the line twice before it made sense. Ethan and Marlene were not saying the statements were harmless opinion. They were not saying Marlene had been misunderstood. They were saying the words were not defamatory because they were true. That I had been the medical reason our marriage had produced no children. I felt the room narrow. Ada watched me carefully, then said, "They planted their flag in the one place they should have avoided." I looked up. "If they say it was you," she said, "they have to prove it wasn't him." For the first time in years, the lie had signed its own name. Ada did not move fast after that. That was one of the things I learned about the law. It never runs just because your heart is finally ready. It walks, papers in hand, making everyone sign for every step. She filed a motion asking the court to require Ethan to produce only the medical records directly connected to the claim he and Marlene had chosen to make, not his whole life. Not every private thing. Just the part they had dragged into the room when they said, on paper, that the fault was mine. Ethan's lawyer fought it hard. Privacy, relevance, harassment. Those words came back through Ada like weather reports from a storm I could not see. She explained each one calmly, sitting behind her desk while the clocks in the next room clicked out of rhythm. "They opened the door," she said. "We are not breaking in. We are asking the judge to make them stop standing in the doorway." For days, nothing happened. I worked. I slept badly. I checked my phone too often. Then, at 12:18 on a Wednesday morning, Lila texted me for the first time in over a year. "Please stop. Think about the baby." I sat up in bed and read it until the screen dimmed. The lawsuit was not about Lila. Not officially. It was about Marlene's statements, Ethan's silence, and the job I had lost. So why was Lila awake after midnight, begging me to stop? Why did she not say, "Think about Ethan," or "Think about the family," or even "Think about yourself"? Why the baby? I did not answer. I took a screenshot and sent it to Ada before I could talk myself out of it. Her reply came 10 minutes later. "Scared people point toward the locked door." 11 days after the first hearing, the judge granted the motion in part. The records would stay sealed, reviewed under a protective order, used only as needed. Ada called me to her office the next afternoon. When I walked in, she had one sheet of paper on the desk, most of it blacked out. She looked older than she had the week before. "Read only the line I'm allowed to show you," she said. I did. 6 years earlier, Ethan had been told he had a medical condition that made fathering a biological child extraordinarily unlikely without treatment. 6 years. Before Marlene's pity, before the church whispers, before Lila's baby shower, before he let the world call me empty. I did not cry. The truth was too quiet for that. I only thought of Lila's message. Think about the baby. And for the first time, I understood that the child Marlene had used to bury me might be the one question her family could not survive. That was the question I carried back to the hospital on Friday, November 17th, not like a weapon, more like a sealed envelope in my chest, heavy because I knew what it might contain, and heavier because I knew an innocent child was inside the story somewhere. I had no interest in hurting that baby. I had spent my whole adult life protecting children from the consequences of rooms they never chose to enter. But adults had built this lie, and adults were going to have to answer for it. My shift started before sunrise and ended after the sky had already gone dark again. By the time I stepped out of the NICU, my shoulders ached from leaning over warmers, and there was a red mark across the bridge of my nose where my mask had pressed too long. I remember thinking I could make it to the parking garage without seeing anyone. That was all I wanted. One clean exit. Then Rowe stepped in front of the elevators. She was dressed for visiting, not waiting. Cream coat, pearl earrings, a blue gift bag looped over her wrist, with tissue paper spilling out of the top. Through the open door behind her, I could see flowers crowded on the windowsill of Lila's room. Blue hydrangeas, white roses, a silver balloon that said "Welcome, baby boy." Marlene's eyes found my badge first, then my face. "Well," she said, smiling, "look at you, still taking care of everyone else's babies." A nurse at the station looked up. I felt the hallway still around us in that small hospital way, where nobody admits they are listening but everyone hears. I did not answer. Marlene took one step closer and lowered her voice just enough to pretend she had manners. "Leaving you was my son's best decision," she said. "Now he finally has the son you could never give him." There it was again. The old sentence, the old bruise. Only this time, I knew where the bruise had come from. I touched the silver clip on my scrub pocket and looked at her. "Is that what he told you?" Her smile faltered, but only for a second. Then the elevator doors opened behind her. Keene walked out first, carrying a brown legal folder against her coat. Beside her was a man I had never seen before, broad-shouldered, tired-eyed, wearing a gray work jacket with an electrical union patch on the sleeve. He looked past Marlene toward Lila's room, and whatever color was in Lila's face disappeared when she saw him through the doorway. Ada did not raise her voice. "Mrs. Rowe," she said, "this hallway is not a courtroom, but the next room where your family says that out loud will be." Marlene looked down at the folder. The name on the first page was Miles Navarro. The hearing took place 3 weeks later on a cold morning that made the courthouse steps shine with a thin skin of ice. I remember the sound of my shoes on the marble floor, too loud in the hallway, and the way my breath fogged once before the doors closed behind me. Ada walked at my side without touching my arm. She knew better. Some mornings, balance is something you have to prove to yourself. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. That made it worse. There was nowhere for anyone to hide from anyone else. Marlene sat in the second row with her purse clutched in both hands, dressed in navy as if grief had a dress code. Ethan sat at the defense table, pale and freshly shaved, looking like a man who had slept badly and still expected the room to remember who he used to be. Lila was near the back, stiff in a camel coat, her eyes fixed on the floor. Miles Navarro sat 2 rows behind her. He did not look angry. He looked like someone waiting for a door to open that he had been standing outside for too long. Bethany Pike was there, so was Graham Ellis. Harriet sat behind me, silent as a wall. Ada did not perform. That was what made people listen. She stood with one hand on her folder and built the morning piece by piece. First, Marlene's words. The fundraiser. The hallway. The witnesses who had heard Clara Bennett described as the reason her marriage had failed to produce children. Then the damage. The supervisor position. The internal note. The salary I lost. My name turned from a person into a concern. Then Ada turned to the defense they had chosen. They had not called it opinion, they had called it truth. And because they had called it truth, the court had allowed a narrow look at the record that truth required. Ada's voice stayed even as she explained that 6 years earlier, Ethan Rowe had received medical information making biological fatherhood extraordinarily unlikely without treatment. She said it like a lab value. Plain, necessary, unemotional. The room changed before anyone moved. Marlene's head turned slowly toward Ethan. Bethany pressed a hand to her mouth. Graham looked down at his lap. Ethan stood halfway, then stopped when his lawyer caught his sleeve. "That doesn't prove," he started. The judge looked over her glasses. "Sit down, Mr. Rowe." Ada continued. "There was also," she said, "a related paternity petition involving the child publicly presented as Ethan Rowe's son. Early filings in that matter did not support Ethan's biological paternity." Lila made a small sound. Miles closed his eyes. Marlene turned on me then, her face breaking open with panic. "You did this." I stood slowly. "No, Marlene," I said. "You were right about one thing. Someone in my marriage was hiding the truth about children." I looked at Ethan. It just wasn't me. Then I sat down, because the file had already said the rest. What followed did not feel like victory. It felt like a room exhaling after holding its breath too long. Ethan did not argue again. His lawyer asked for a recess, and when the judge granted it, Ethan stayed seated for several seconds with both hands flat on the table, staring at nothing. Marlene walked out ahead of him, but not with the straight-backed certainty she had carried into every church basement and hospital hallway for years. She looked smaller, not innocent, just smaller. There is a difference. The women from Grace Hollow did not rush to comfort her. Bethany Pike gathered her coat slowly, eyes lowered, as if she had finally understood how many times she had repeated something she never bothered to question. Graham Ellis left without looking at me. A week later, the hospital board requested a meeting. They did not give me the apology I had imagined on bad nights. People rarely do. The chair cleared his throat, used words like reviewed, unfounded, and unfortunate, and said the supervisor position was being reopened with my name at the top of the list. I listened without helping him make it easier. Then I accepted the job. Not because it fixed everything. It did not. But because I had earned that room long before anyone decided my private pain made me unstable. Ethan's insurance clients began leaving in quiet ways. No public scene, no dramatic collapse, just canceled appointments, unanswered calls, men at the barber shop lowering their voices when he walked in. Marlene stepped down from the women's ministry. For personal reasons. Everyone knew what that meant. In towns like ours, reputation does not explode. It leaks out through every crack you once used to spread someone else's shame. Lila and Miles handled the baby through court. I stayed out of it. That child had never been my enemy. He was not proof of my failure, or Ethan's pride, or Lila's lie. He was a baby, and babies deserve to be more than evidence in adult ruins. I wrote Marlene one note. I did not make it long. Anger likes long letters, and I was done feeding it. I will not carry your son's lie anymore. And I will not let you call it family. I never heard back. My first morning as NICU respiratory supervisor, I clipped my grandmother's silver pin back onto my scrub pocket. The unit was quiet in that early hour way, all dim lights and soft alarms. A premature boy in bed 4 was finally holding steady on less oxygen than the night before. I stood beside his warmer, watching the small rise and fall of his chest. For years, I thought truth would save me if I waited politely enough. I was wrong. Truth does not always come for you on its own. Sometimes you have to carry it into the room, set it on the table, and let the people who lied explain why their names are written all over it. If Clara's story teaches us anything, it is that silence is not always peace. Sometimes silence is just the place where other people hide what they did to you. We are often taught to be patient, to be graceful, to let time reveal the truth. And sometimes that is wisdom. But there is another kind of silence, the kind that slowly turns into permission. Permission for people to rewrite your name. Permission for them to make your pain sound like a character flaw. Permission for a family to protect its image by sacrificing the one person who refuses to fight dirty. Family should never require you to carry a lie, just so everyone else can stay comfortable. Love should never ask you to become smaller, so someone else can feel whole. And loyalty is not proven by how much humiliation you can swallow. Real love tells the truth, even when the truth is inconvenient. Real family protects the wounded person, not the reputation of the one who caused the wound. Clara did not win because she became cruel. She won because she finally stopped confusing endurance with dignity. She did not attack a child. She did not chase revenge. She simply took the lie to a room where words had consequences. That is the kind of strength many people learn late in life. The strength to stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, and start protecting the life you still have left. There is deep courage in rebuilding after betrayal. Not the loud kind people clap for, but the quiet kind. Getting up, going to work, keeping your hands steady. Refusing to let bitterness become your new home. Choosing truth without becoming hateful. That kind of resilience does not erase the hurt, but it does return ownership of your life back to you. So if you have ever been blamed for something that was never yours, if you have ever stayed silent just to keep a family together, I hope this story reminds you. You are allowed to set the burden down. What would you have done in Clara's place? Would you have stayed quiet, taken the settlement, or brought the truth into court? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that they are not broken.